Part 5. The structure of the carriage had not changed between the journey to and from Nazareth, but for some reason, every slight bump and jostle along the way seemed magnified. Perhaps it was because of the gloomy atmosphere in the carriage's interior. Or perhaps it was because the people occupying the carriage had changed. The troops escorting them to Nazareth were composed of men from the 1st Legion. The ones escorting them from Nazareth were from the 2nd Legion. In place of Fluter was one of his disciples. In place of Rune was one of his scribes. The 2 original occupants of the carriage who remained were Jerkneve and Bazawood. Fluter was not here because he wanted to discuss what he had seen with his disciples. In his stead, he had sent one of his acolytes to take his place in Jerkneve's carriage. Though the acolyte was skilled, he was still a far cry from his master. In all likelihood, the discussion in Fluter's carriage was probably at a feverish intensity. The mood in their carriage would probably be the polar opposite of this one. In Jerkneve's carriage, there was only silence. A grim mood filled the carriage. The one who had made it this way was Jerkneve himself. His face was hard, and his expression bitter, like he had chewed on a lotus root. The man who was known and feared as the Bloody Emperor was a man who typically wore a thin smile on his face. In truth, that expression was carefully rehearsed. This was because he had to cultivate the impression of a strong emperor among his people. A person who stood above all others has to make a striking impression on everyone, otherwise it would cause unease among those who followed him. However, it seemed that Bazawood, who knew Jerkneve the best among these 3 people, had never seen this look on Jerkneve's face. Everyone present knew this, which was why they kept quiet and remained in their places. Even if he felt them looking at him, Jerkneve did not plan to say anything. The reason for that was abundantly clear. Or rather, if anyone could think of anything else, Jerkneve would split open that person's head to see what was inside. Chances are, he would find a brain the size of his pinky fingernail. The great underground tomb of Nazareth, in truth calling it a tomb was grossly inappropriate. That's a demon king's castle. Those frightening beings, and beyond them, the specter of death, which sat upon a throne. And it was not just fear they felt. They had seen myriad luxuries, glittering architecture, and all manner of decorations. Nobody could remain unawed by that. Jerkneve could easily predict the difficulties his country would have in the face of that being which possessed superlative military and economic power, among other things. If a country's leader was strong, he would give his people a sense of security. However strong a country might be, being led by a sheep would only fill it with unease. Fortunately, the empire was a lion through and through. And then, all of a sudden, a dragon had appeared before them. How would the empire's citizens feel about that? Jerkneve stared down at his hands, which were clenched so tight, all the color had gone from them. No, it's not over yet. Our defeat hasn't been decided yet. Jerkneve smiled. It was a smile that fit the name of the Bloody Emperor. Perhaps they were waiting for the return of that mocking smile, but a feeling of relief came over each of his subordinates. As he saw their reaction, his smile grew more and more genuine. Don't stare so hard. Aren't you losing your focus here? Your Majesty. The 3 voices overlapped. There were hints of joy within them, joy that their emperor had come back to them. As Jerkneve realized what he should be doing, he nodded vigorously. To begin with, I would like to confirm if everyone feels the same way about that place. If anyone has a differing opinion, feel free to give it. Who knows, I might be the one who's gotten things wrong. Well then, I suppose we should start with the most important thing. What does everyone think of the ruler of the great underground tomb of Nazareth, Ainzuelgaon? Jerkneve deliberately said the name of that incredible monster a beat slower than normal. Ainzuelgaon is a monster among monsters who can easily create death knights, and if we make an enemy of him, the empire will probably be destroyed. However, even if we do not antagonize him, there's a chance he might kill us all anyway, because he is undead and he would take joy in it. Does anyone disagree? No. It is as His Majesty says. Ah, we agree, then. To add to that, I don't think we can beat him with the power of mankind. Frankly speaking, I don't think we could even get within striking distance of him, even if we mustered all the armies of the Empire. After receiving 3 similar replies, Jerknev continued speaking. In addition, I can sense that as an absolute ruler, he possesses a charm that befits a king. Ah, yes, his presence was truly formidable. It felt like he was more charismatic than our emperor. Bazawodono. It is fine. That is a fact. The frightening thing is that he said just one sentence, and from that sentence I could feel the immense pressure of a tyrant. You're making too much noise. Quiet down. Was that it? Jerknev nodded lightly to the scribe. That was without doubt the attitude which Ainzuelgaon adopted as the king of the great underground tomb of Nazareth. Also, the scariest thing about that monster is the way he thinks. He's a rare breed of schemer whose every move is made with a purpose. Don't look so surprised, you lot. Think about it. He's probably predicted the flow of everything we have discussed so far. Otherwise, why would he release us so easily? An opponent with so much power, who doesn't use brawn, but brains. He is no mere mindless brute. That was the most troublesome part about him. After that, let us talk about his followers. What do you think of them? This time, he pushed his subordinates for their opinions. The ones near him must have been his close aides. And the black-winged woman beside him. She should be his queen, right? It seemed that way, from her attitude. The jaw-dropping beauty in the white dress. Even if there was no kindness in the thin smile she wore, it still possessed a charm that moved men's hearts. Given her beauty, there would surely be many men who would be consumed by the desire to see that smile directed at them. As for the black wings at her waist, one could tell they were not magic items or items of clothing. The main reason was because they were far too natural. While there were humans with wings and other winged species in this world, she should probably be a demon, an outsider to this world, Jerknev thought. She might well be. I think it's possible that she's Ainzuelgaon's wife. If she's his wife, then, how shall I put this? Is only his face made of bones? Or is he wearing a mask? Who knows? Still, despite Jerknev's words, none of them felt that it was a mask, and they did not think it was an illusion either. And there's also Demiurge, who can control people with his voice. Is he a bard? Perhaps he's good at singing because he's a frog. Bards could use performances with musical instruments to produce magical effects. The power of Demiurge to control people through words was very similar to that. In addition, he had also heard that the Fey creatures called Lorelei had an ability similar to his. However, that man was nothing like the beautiful beings that were the Fey. He was absolutely certain of that. Ah, I see. A bard, then? That does sound quite similar. And there was a gigantic insect as well, I believe. What was that? Although I think it could be some sort of insect-type species. I don't know much about Ant-Man, so I think you would be better served asking Master about it. The world was huge. There were many species that were not widely known, and some of them could spontaneously mutate. Also, according to the legends, monster kings were known to be more developed than normal. It was similar to how ant queens were different from worker ants. Jerknev thought that it was a possibility. In that case, the remaining ones are the silver-haired girl and those 2 dark elves. Leaving the latter 2 aside, who's the former? Judging from her huge boobs, could she be a concubine? Laughter filled the carriage at Bozzywood's comment. Ah, well, if she was just a concubine, then she wouldn't be brought out like that, no? She's probably as strong as that dark elf. Oi, WuxaWorldAudio.com. I think you're getting it wrong. Bozzywood's words were infused with seriousness. It's true, in all likelihood the ones closest to that monster Ains are probably his aides. However, that doesn't mean they're all strong. Think about it. If the only criterion to be His Majesty's follower was strength, and he surrounded himself with 100 people like me, don't you think the government would crumble in short order? Simply put, she was chosen to be his follower for reasons other than strength. Perhaps she's a very intelligent concubine? Maybe she single-handedly manages the affairs of that fortress which calls itself a tomb. I see, came the scattered replies. Jerkneve felt that he had a point. Since their attention had been stolen by Ainzuelgaon's might, they looked at how she was lined up with the dark elves and automatically concluded that the silver-haired girl was a strong being. Of course, it would be scary if another person had the same power as that dark elf. However, being led into a false conclusion by prior prejudice was also a bad thing. That's probably it, Jerkneve said as he looked at his subordinates. I've considered that myself. Come to think of it, he would be somewhat relieved if all his followers were undead. But it would seem he's gathered all sorts of monsters under him. Well, rather than call it a monster gallery, it'd feel more like a wealth of talent. Jerkneve could not help but smile at Bozzywood's blunt words. Indeed, we should probably try and learn more about these fellows. Apart from that, there's the matter of that fortress grandeur. Surely there must have been something written about such a grand place. Regretfully, I know nothing about it. When we return to the capital, I will immediately begin looking into it, starting with myths and legends. Jerkneve graciously accepted the acolyte's apology. I'll leave that to you. Is there anything else we've missed? I honestly can't believe such a wicked monster could create such a stately domain. Did you find anything which could be a clue? By which I mean, is it really a tomb built during that region's history? There was no answer, which meant that they were all wondering the same thing. They could not completely discount the possibility that the fortress had teleported from somewhere else, possibly another world known as the Demon Realm, to a place under that tomb. Or rather, that was easier to swallow. We won't get an answer. As I thought, we just don't have enough information. All we can do is squeeze out as much as we can from Varmalinen, who's stationed over there, and from the fellow who's coming over to the Empire. Do you understand? Of course. We will try not to make the opposition hostile or suspicious. There is no trying here. The enemy's strength is overwhelmingly superior to our own. You need to move carefully so you don't break the false alliance we have. As the scribe lowered his head, Jerkneve suddenly felt the weight sliding off his shoulders. We've done a bad thing to the people we brought along, haven't we? Perhaps that was why he had brought up the girls who had not been released ever since they had been packed into the carriages. Originally, the girls were to be offered to Ainzuelgaon in order to tie him to the Empire. Sex was a universal weapon in any place or era. Perhaps the Imperial intelligence agencies should have prepared professional honey traps. But since the use of magical investigation could potentially complicate things, they had instead selected pure, innocent girls instead. Although I think this is disrespectful to the courage they gathered up to bid farewell to their families, don't you think they should be happy about this? Do you think so? Being able to gain that monster's love is a pretty impressive thing. Any woman who would gladly make love to such a monster would be very brave. Bozzywood was hinting that no such people existed, but that was a naive way of thinking. Jerkneve could confidently attest to that, being thoroughly familiar with the secret battles that women fought, with his mother poisoning her own husband as an example. Women are braver than men think, and they act for passion and gain. There should be no shortage of women out there who are willing to offer their bodies to that skeleton king. In that sense, we're the ones who should be happy now. After all, one of them might tell Ainzuelgaon that we threatened to kill her and her family. Although the only response to his words were bitter smiles, Jerkneve believed that might actually happen. Jerkneve's reforms, pushed through with autocratic power, had made him a lot of enemies in the nobles he had displaced. Of course, he had his allies, but in truth the people he could really trust were only a few of his close aides and his mentor, Fluter. Suddenly, a question struck him like a falling feather. It was about Fluter. Not only was Fluter his mentor, but he was also a pillar of the Empire and its trump card. He was a man that even Jerknev revered as the highest hero of the Empire. Jerknev was keenly aware that beneath his sage-like face was a near fanatical desire to explore the depths of magic. It was because of that desire that he had his doubts, that had been far too unlike Fluider. Ainzuelgaon was a great magic caster that far surpassed Fluider. He could effortlessly create the Death Knights that Fluider could not even control. Then, why had he said nothing and left the tomb with him? If it were Gramps, he would probably beg that wicked monster for magical knowledge, right? He would genuflect before him and offer everything. That sounded like what would have happened. Everyone had knelt before Demiurge back then. However, it might have just been a distraction to focus their attention on that bizarre situation while he used the opportunity to perform some sort of mind control on Fluider. He could not imagine Ainzuelgaon wanting to take Fluider as a minion. Although Fluider was the Empire's trump card, when compared to that monster's power, he was little more than a speck of dust. However, Fluider's accumulated knowledge was valuable in and of itself. In addition, if he could take control of Fluider, the Empire's military power would plummet, and they would lose their finest weapon against Ainzuelgaon. It would be like putting a collar on a slave. Is that the case? Gramps didn't say anything. Was it because he already knew? Did he know about Ainzuelgaon's power beforehand? In that moment, shock ran through him like a lightning strike. He broke out in a cold sweat. Your Majesty, you don't look well. Are you alright? Shall we call a priest? No need. I said, there's no need. That's right. No need. Jerknev glanced at his panicked subordinates, and he was once more consumed in a maelstrom of contemplation. Am I afraid? Me? His mind was a chaotic mess, and he could not sort his thoughts out. Or rather, it was more like he did not want to think those thoughts and was trying to avoid contemplating them. No, if I run away from this now, it will only invite disaster upon us. Calm down. I have to calm down. I have to calm down and think. Jerknev continued to ponder the question as he was bathed in curious looks. For starters, let's consider Gramps. Assuming Gramps already knew about Ainzuelgaon's power. No, if he did know about his power, then his weird actions could be easily explained. So Gramps has some kind of secret deal going on with that monster. Impossible. Unless Jerknev did not have the energy to worry about the shocked looks on his subordinates' faces. No, that's not right, Jerknev. When Gramps saw the Death Knight, that fear on his face was genuine. Which is proof that he didn't know about Ainzuelgaon's power. Or not. Maybe what Fluider did not know was that fellow's ability to control Death Knights. He probably knew about Ainzuelgaon, that incredible magic caster, from the beginning. It was like putting the scattered pieces of a jigsaw together to reveal a beautiful or horrifying picture. So, Fluider knows that monster. From how long ago were they in cahoots? From the beginning. That's right. Fluider was involved with every step of this mess, from the discovery of the tomb to the dispatch of the workers. He had finally made a connection between all the scattered pieces of the puzzle. When one thought about it that way, most of the mysteries could be brought to light. Treachery, is it? Treachery. He sold the Empire out. Was it a voice of bitter resentment from the pits of hell? Or perhaps, of a crying child? His subordinates did not dare ask him questions. They simply remained silent as they studied his face. Jerknev turned to face them. Fluider Paradine has betrayed us all. That being the case, what damage will this do to the Empire? Can we put him in a sinecure and place him under house arrest? Everyone could not help but stare at that unbelievable statement. How is that possible, Your Majesty? This is too much for a joke. Uncontrollable anger burned in Jerknev as the acolyte spoke. He wanted to shout, I don't want to hear such foolishness, but he held his tongue. The reason he did that was because somewhere in a corner of his mind, a young Jerknev was saying that he could not believe it either. Jerknev had grown up watching the schemes and treachery of the dark side of noble society. With that, the adult Jerknev took a deep breath and expelled the blazing heat in his chest and the burning emotions in his heart. I will say this one more time. Fluider Paradine has betrayed us. That being the case, what damage will this do to the Empire? His subordinates looked at each other, and after a few seconds of this, the acolyte spoke. It is difficult to imagine. The amount of damage cannot be estimated with a single glance. With Master around, we could be confident of overcoming any other country. We have been able to remain uninvolved with the petty politics of other nations thus far because of that. He looked at the scribe to see if he agreed with the acolyte's words. The scribe turned pale and nodded. If the neighboring countries know he's been sequestered, they might start making moves. Isn't that what the Imperial Intelligence Agency is for? I see. Thanks to Fluider, they haven't had the chance to gain much experience. It is as you say, Your Majesty. Master, truly, the possibility is shockingly high. Jerknev interrupted the scribe. But if that is the case, then we will have an incredible amount of work to do. First, let us decide who Fluider's successor will be. Are there any suitable candidates? The flames of desire burned bright in the acolyte's eyes as he heard those words, and Jerknev could not help but smile internally. The position of being Fluider's successor as the Imperial Court Wizard was a mouth-watering temptation. After all, it was a position that gave one the right to administer and manage arcane magic casters throughout the Empire. Because the position had always been filled by that great hero, nobody else could claim it. Even if one had the ambition for it, their opponent was far too strong to overcome by wicked means. And now, this hitherto sealed-off position had been offered to him. Greed is good. Desire drives progress. I approve of that sort of desire. However, I should probably ask, just in case. However, one must bear in mind that as the Imperial Court Wizard, one may be called upon to do battle with that monster. The flames of the acolyte's ambition went out in that instant. He could not even bring himself to be excited about it. The position he had longed for became one he wished to avoid more than anything else in the world. He would have a better chance of serving a jump off a 500-meter tall cliff into a shoal of rocks than he would in a spell battle against Ainzuelgaon. No, he might be better off dying on the spot. As the acolyte thought about that prospect, a new look came into his eyes. It was the look of a frightened mouse which had been cornered by a predator. The hopes in Jerknev's heart died. He could tell that this man did not have the courage to take on Ainzuelgaon. Or rather, he should never have expected that in the first place. Yes. In that case, I know some people who can use the fourth tier of magic. How about selecting one of them? Granted, I do know some spells of that tier, but I am not very versed with them. Aren't you the most skilled of the acolytes? How could that be? There are many more excellent than I. When we return, I shall furnish their names to you immediately. It was only obvious that a man would want to surrender immediately when asked to fight an incredible monster like that. However, what he needed was a man who would not lose his fighting spirit even in that event. That won't work, huh? It would be naive to think he's an exception. It would probably be better to consider that anyone who knows of Ainzuelgaon won't have the courage to fight him. That means I'll have to hand that task to people who haven't met that being yet. Perhaps these ignorant folk will be driven by desire and struggle even more desperately against him. It was not the best of plans, but he had nothing else to go with. I see. Then, gather information on them and then conduct interviews. After that, we'll want to have our intelligence people ready to deal with that fellow. However, we still need to help Ainzuelgaon, so for the time being, we'll have to be his obedient dogs, in order to build good relations with him. Understood. His obedient dogs. Nobody objected to that turn of phrase. How could anyone who had seen the great underground tomb of Nazarick do so? Then, Your Majesty, how long will we wag for that monster? Will our children have to roll over when he commands it? Our grandchildren? Jerknev looked around himself, in order to make sure that no spies had made their way into the carriage, and checked that the door was shut tight. With all that done, and with no further problems apparent to him, Jerknev began explaining his strategy to fight Ainzuelgaon. We, and by we, I mean the Empire, the Kingdom, the Theocracy, the Council Alliance, the Holy Kingdom and other countries will come together in a coalition. It will be a grand coalition, aimed at defeating Ainzuelgaon. 6 wide eyes turned to Jerknev. What's there to be surprised about? No single nation can defeat that monster. Then all we can hope for is to bring all the neighboring countries into a coalition so we can turn the tide. Are we really going to fight him? Yes. Jerknev's reply was simple and curt. Rather, if we do not fight, we have no chance of survival. Then why are we helping that monster found a country? Because that is the first step in the formation of this grand coalition. Jerknev looked at everyone. Are you listening? Good. We are currently on the outskirts of Irantil, which is a valuable location at the borders of the Empire, the Kingdom, and the Theocracy. If that monster Gaon wants to found a nation there, he will be making enemies of all 3 of those nations. Jerknev took a breath, and continued. And another thing. Gaon is undead. I doubt he will treat humans, the living, with anything approaching decency. The people will not suffer the rule of an undead king either. There will be rebellion, which will promptly be stamped out by that monster. The kingdom will not be happy about yielding land to him either, and I doubt the Theocracy, the strongest nation in the vicinity, will do nothing. But, Your Majesty, if the Empire helps him in his endeavors, surely we will be seen as taking that monster's side, right? The nearby nations will be on guard against us. That coalition you speak of will not count the Empire among them. And even if they beat that monster, we'll be next, or worse, they might target us first. HMPH, Jerknev smirked. We will work behind the scenes. We need to let the other countries know that the Empire is spying on Gaon's nation. It'll be difficult, but it's also the only way. Will they really believe us? If it were me, I would think it was a trap. Then, we will have to convince them by showing them Ainzuelgaon's strength. If only there was a way we could show the other nations his power. Well, we'll have to arrange for such a situation. For example, letting him show his power on the battlefield. Couldn't the Empire just not help Gaon build his nation, and feign ignorance of everything? Jerknev glared at the scribe as though he were retarded. We have to flip back and forth like bats just to ensure the minimum degree of safety for ourselves. What do you think the people in the kingdom will do if he gains territory nearby for nothing? In other words, Jerknev was picking the not quite worst case. For that reason, the Empire has to pretend to be that monster's friend while aiding that coalition. In other words, if we're exposed, we're most likely going to be the first on that monster's chopping block. Or rather, if it were up to me, I would certainly destroy this country first as an example to others. I'm sure you would go through with that if it were up to you, Your Majesty. I'll take that as praise and accept it. Because of that, we cannot be the ones to propose that grand coalition. We need to let other countries make the first move. What we should do is gather as much information about Nazarick as we can, as well as find someone who can defeat Gaon. Do people like that really exist? Given the casual tone with which it was said, nobody would have believed those words came from the acolyte. Gaon was an unimaginably powerful opponent, who might be unbeatable even by the mightiest dragons. He was an opponent that made people think that way. And to that, Jerknev issued a confident reply. Indeed, they do. People like that really exist, don't they? Look within that throne room. When he put it that way, it seemed obvious enough. The monsters arrayed with Ains, Aura, Mare, the silver-haired girl, the insect, Demiurge. He was referring to them. Do you plan to induce a revolt? Although I don't think that may be possible, we should still prepare for it, just in case. We need to prepare wealth, prestige, members of the opposite sex and so on to make us seem at least a little bit attractive to them. Won't it be difficult? Ah, indeed, it will be. Ainzuelgaon styles himself as a tyrant. Thus they won't betray him easily. However, even if that is the case, we have to take action. This is not just a conflict between nations anymore. Jerknev looked at the three of them with a resolute expression on his face. What comes after this will be a battle for the survival of humanity as a species. It will be a fight for the future. Devote your hearts and souls to it. Part 6. And so, I think the Emperor will try to put a scheme like that into practice. If he were more foolish, his actions might fall outside the predicted range, but I think the chances of that will be low. Reading the movements of a slightly above-average intellect that imagines himself a genius is easier than trying to predict the actions of a complete moron. Demiurge raised a finger as he said that. In other words, the Emperor will try to form an alliance in order to defeat us, to defeat Ain-sama, right? He's surprisingly stupid. Then shouldn't we take the initiative and wipe him out first? Mare followed up after Shiltiranora, but there was no anger in his voice. It was more like he was deciding whether or not to pick up a rock he found along the side of the road. More important than this problem is, Sebas wanted to speak, but someone else had already anticipated what he was going to say. Is the fact that he actually thinks we would betray Ain-sama, is that it? Really, Sebas? It seems the Emperor does not know the meaning of loyalty. Mocking laughter filled the room. Did he really think they would betray Ains, one of the 41 supreme beings who made them? Although this was nothing more than Demiurge's hypothesis, it was enough to thoroughly displease the Guardians. A cold light gleamed in their eyes. Well, it's not like I'm trying to speak like Mayor, but I'm still pretty mad. Shall we kill them all? Shiltir laughed as she saw Aura in a foul mood for the first time. I'll turn him into a vampire. After all, if he's good enough, there is no reason he can't serve in Nazarick. Although Cocytus had remained silent, his large mandibles made a clacking sound of warning. Ladies and gentlemen, you remember that we are in the presence of Ain-sama. As they heard Seba's cold, clear voice, Aura, Shiltir's and Cocytus' anger instantly vanished. Kuhu. That's right, everyone, please calm down. Please recall what Demiurge just said. All of this has been arranged. What can we enjoy if not the antics of this clown? Instead, we should be grateful, because all of this is nothing more than a part of Ain-sama's master plan. Right, Ain-sama? Who? Ain-sama's plan, huh? I see. A special plan concocted by someone with the same name as me. Making the Baharuth Empire ally within struggle against Nazarick was part of that plan too, huh? I have no idea what that's all about. If only I could ask this Ains fellow about it. However, running away from reality like this would not change anything. Honestly, Ains wanted to ask about the details of the plan, and what about Ains that Demiurge and Albedo were imaging. However, he could not do that. Ains turned his line of sight toward Albedo. He saw a woman who was sweet as honey, her eyes glazed over with love and fascination, her cheeks a faint rosy pink. She had reacted like this because she believed that everything was proceeding as planned, because she was so overcome by her master's insight. As such, Ains could no longer deny them. Who could say, what, when the mood was like this? With regard to Albedo's question, there was only one answer Ains could give. Indeed. That is so. He wanted to praise his voice for not wavering. Oh, the Guardians chorused in respect. Kuhu. Albedo spread her arms, and with them, her wings at her waist opened up as well. Ain-sama wishes to take over a human city peacefully, and rule the region with love and compassion. Yet, the Baharuth Empire has decided to form a vile conspiracy against this paradise on Earth. In the near future, Ain-sama will show these countries the true meaning of kindness. Is that not the just cause that he seeks? How I look forward to that day. Everything rests in the palm of Ain-sama's hand. When that moron finds out, I wonder what sort of face will he make. After all, Ain-sama always thinks several moves ahead. As Demiurge delivered his reverent speech, Albedo continued with a suitably respectful expression on her face. Indeed, Ain-sama's wisdom is beyond our ability to match. If Ain-sama had not created the Hieroman, it would be impossible to rule peacefully. In that case, Rantel could only be controlled by violence and terror. Perhaps we could use the Golden Princess to achieve similar effects, but that would be a waste of a trump card. She is a human being who is just as interesting, no, perhaps even more so than what I have determined from analysis of Seba's intelligence reports. She will be an excellent pawn. After hearing that, I too wish to take a look at her. Then, after we found our nation, shall we have her be an envoy to us? After all, promises must be kept. You, too, have gone off topic. You are wasting Ain-sama's precious time. Ains responded with a simple, "It's fine," to their hurried apologies. In truth, he had learned a lot from their casual conversation, and he had gained time to think of more excuses. To Ains, that had been a valuable opportunity. But truth to be told, Ain-sama is really amazing, Shiltir said. Yup, Shiltir. After all, Ain-sama thought up a plan that managed to astound even Albedo and Demiurge. As expected of Ain-sama. Why, you're too cool. I really admire you. My foolish self is ashamed of my lack of intelligence. All I can say is that our inability to keep pace with Ain-sama's considerations is truly unbecoming. The Guardian's praise stabbed at Ains like swords. Although Ains could not help but think of it as mockery, the Guardian's eyes were filled with respect and loyalty, and their worship of him was genuine. Therefore, Ains did not contradict them, but instead used his acting skills to answer, as usual. There is nothing of that sort. It was merely a coincidence. And in the end, Demiurge and Albedo saw through it. No, if Ain-sama had not responded thusly, I would not have been able to connect the dots. Demiurge is correct. Planning so far ahead without any knowledge of the situation is a feat only possible by the greatest of the supreme beings. I have fallen even deeper in love with you. As expected of Ain-sama, whose intellect surpasses even that of Demiurge, the wisest mind in Nazarick, Shiltir said. It's true. Ain-sama is really amazing. Aura exclaimed. Are really amazing. Have long known Ain-sama possessed excellent abilities, but could not imagine the extent of his prowess, as expected of the greatest treasure of Nazarick. Well put. He is filled with compassion and overflows with wisdom. There is no better master for us than Ain-sama, Albedo said. Come to think of it, there's a matter that needs to be decided. Although I have no problems addressing Ain-sama as king, such a simple title might result in his being conflated with the bugs surrounding us. I feel we must consider a more fitting form of address for Ain-sama. The Guardians unanimously approved Demiurge's suggestion. Do you approve, Ain-sama? It is fine. Do as you see fit. Being called King Ainzuelgaon was bad enough. His emotion override had already kicked in several times when he thought about the implications of naming himself a king. Does anyone have any suggestions? Then, allow me to begin, Shiltir said as she raised her hand. The name we choose should obviously indicate Ain-sama's surpassing beauty. I feel the beautiful king would be fitting. Oh, the Guardians chorused in approval. Beautiful King Ainzuelgaon? Oh, me, Aura piped up as she raised her hand. The name should highlight Ain-sama's power. How about the Powerful King, or Power King for short? I see, the Guardians murmured. Power King Ainzuelgaon? Then, may I try? Because Ain-sama is very kind, it might be good to let people know that. Then, maybe we could try the Merciful King. The Guardians nodded. Merciful King Ainzuelgaon? As for me, here Demiurge paused for effect. To praise Ain-sama's exalted intellect, I propose the Wise King. Wise King Ainzuelgaon? I'm sorry, but I really have to pass on that. What do you think, Sebas? In response to Albedo's question, Sebas replied, I think a simple king will do. Then it is my turn. Because he is the supreme being who stands atop all the other supreme beings, I think the High King would be appropriate. The Guardians once more murmured in approval. High King Ainzuelgaon? How should I say this? All these names sound awfully over the top. Everyone's eyes rested on the only Guardian who had not yet spoken. How about you, Cocytus? Although it might be a bit difficult to compete with High King, do you have any titles you feel are fitting of Ain-sama? In future, Ain-sama will rule many people. Therefore, he will be magician who rules as king. Think Sorcerer King will best fit that. The Guardians did not reply immediately. However, all of them looked at Ains. From the look in their eyes, they all felt there was no better title than that one, although Albedo seemed a little disappointed. Very well. Then I shall use Cocytus' suggestion. Ains slowly rose to his feet. When our nation is founded, I shall name myself the Sorcerer King, Ainzuelgaon. Ains waved his hands in embarrassment toward of the thunderous applause which followed. In truth, he was feeling so uncomfortable that his whole body was getting itchy. Well then, let us demonstrate the power of Nazarick in the battle between the kingdom and the empire. It is as Ain-sama says. They wish to investigate the limits of Ain-sama's power. Little do they know, they have played right into our hands. Demiurge continued, in an excellent mood. Before negotiations can take place, the most important thing is to strike a mighty blow to the other party and let them understand the difference between our might and theirs. Foolish creatures like humans will do foolish things because they do not realize how powerful their opponents are. Indeed, that emperor is a foolish creature for not knowing that bowing his head and licking Ain-sama's boots is the wisest course of action. I thought about that myself, but is letting humans lick Ain-sama's boots not too good for them? I see. As expected of Albedo. But if I had to lick Ain-sama, I would choose his body. Ains decided to pretend he had not heard Sheltir and Albedo whispering to each other. Then everyone, begin the task of exalting the name of Nazarick. Understood. The Guardians' shouts of acknowledgement blended into one and filled the room. End chapter.